But one of the things I love doing with you the most is talking politics because you're so knowledgeable. So let's start with this article about Trump calling his uh, critics haters
Yeah.
and bad people, and he does it for a reason. He apparently it's a pointed strategy. A strategy. There are analysts that say it's demagoguery, that this is what he is doing, that there's a lot that goes into it. It is political rhetoric. It inspires emotions. It kind of whips up this frenzy around the people that you consider to be enemies. And it is an effective strategy for him. And it's what he continues to do. And
Okay.
yeah.
So my experience with Donald Trump goes back, sad to say, half a century. When I was a New York reporter covering him then, he was a liberal Democrat then. Uh, Local reporters, for the most part, there were conservative local reporters, but for the most part, had no animus toward Trump because of his politics. He gave money to the Clintons, who went to his wedding with Melania and all of that. Um, so let me tell you something that we all said to each other 50 years ago. He's stupid. It is. I mean, I remember talking to Barbara Ress, who was, and to his credit, he had a female chief of engineering for his construction, which very few people did. But, I talked to Barbara and she said, you know, I fire people who are incompetent, but Donald likes them, so he gives them their job back. And then I have to fire them in the afternoon because this would go on all the time. And we would joke about how not bright he was. This was the guy who invited his girlfriend, Marla Maples, to the same ski vacation that he took his wife on. Um, it's not a strategy. Now, does it work? Does it have the same effects as if it were? Yes. Yeah, it does. So you can use all those names, but these experts who say, "Oh, yes, this is very, very carefully planned this because whatever." No, it's who he is. It's always who he's been. He's always attacked. He does ad hominem attacks. True. If you asked him what ad hominem means, he would think it was part of a recipe. Well, you put in the soup, and then you add hominem, and then the manam, and then you put that in, and somebody stirs it, and I don't know. I don't drink soup anyway, so who cares? I mean, that's always been Donald, and I think there's this thing of expert. 2 weeks ago, I got to ask Senator Chris Murphy, who I respect a great deal, a very, very bright man, a good-hearted man, but I asked him whether Trump really thought he could cleave Russia from China, which seems to be part of his idea about getting close to Putin, that Putin will become an enemy of China when Russia, which is just an economic disaster area, 21% inflation this year. Whether, that was a strategy. And Murphy was going, oh, well, it's a smokescreen. And I love Chris. It's a smokescreen because, Trump's real thing is this, that, and the other. And nobody could possibly believe that you could separate China from Russia because China gives Russia so much support. And I was just like, they all want to think that the man who's elected president of the United States is smart, crafty, and sly. A lot of people thought that about Nixon, and Nixon was crafty and sly, but Nixon also had psychological problems, which anybody who remembers the speech he gave after he resigned, the one to the White House staff, which dig up recordings of it because it's the most painfully psychologically open moment, I think, of any president. He just starts talking about his mother and all of these things, and you really get an insight into what drove Nixon. And it's just people want to believe it. You remember the book by Jerzy Kaczynski, where Chauncey Gardner, whose name was only given as Chauncey, he was a gardener, but when he said he was a gardener, people thought, oh, that must be his last name. And he ends up being president because everybody wants to see in him a reflection of their own hopes and their own desires, their own prejudices or whatever. And in the book, he becomes president, and he has a minimal IQ, and yet he becomes successful because people want to see things. I think even Trump's enemies want to see him as a brilliant strategist, a man who has all these ideas. I was reading that article you sent along, and I was remembering, because it kept citing experts say. There's a wonderful book. I took it down off the shelf by my friend Christopher Cerf. It's co-written by Victor Navasky, called The Experts Speak. And it's about all the stupid things experts have said over the years. We'll have atomic-powered vacuum cleaners in 10 years and all of these things. It's not a strategy. Now, do the people around him use it, as a strategy? Sure. But this is the same Trump we've always had. He gives a tax not because, well, this will set the people back on their feet. He gives it because he doesn't know the facts. You sent me a thing. It was a video of Trump signing all of these executive orders about education. And he has an aide. I've never seen a president do this ever. The ones I liked, the ones I didn't like, the ones I was on.
Albert, this is
at the news conference, explained to him what each thing he was
Right.
signing was.
Right. As if he has to be convinced to sign it in the moment. It's very bizarre.
And
Albert, let's
he
play
has
that
no idea
video.
why he's there or what he's supposed to do.
Here it is.
He does something I've also never seen anybody do. Liberal, conservative, doesn't matter. He then hold it up to show everybody, like they could read the fine print on it. And it reminded me of the moment in Godfather 2, when the Nevada senator, who later gets tripped up by Michael Corleone because he ends up in a brothel owned by the Corleones, but is doing this proclamation and holds it up to show everybody the same way, even though nobody can read what it says.
No.
And I thought, oh my God, this is just...
Yeah.
He has to be told what he's saying.
Let's watch the video, Gil.
Yeah, go. Sure.
Executive order on school discipline policies under, I believe it was the Biden administration, first Obama and then Biden. The Department of Justice issued guidance that made it almost impossible for schools to enforce adequate disciplinary policies. This created issues in the classroom for teachers and students alike. Basically, they focused on CRT and sort of diversity ideology instead of actually just enforcing the rules in classrooms to ensure a safe learning environment. This executive order revokes that prior guidance and puts us back in a place where hopefully the Department of Education can focus on education and teachers can focus on teaching in a safe environment.
And this was important for you, Linda, as I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely, because it gives teachers the authority now to have discipline in their classroom and discipline the person who is being disruptive.
Great.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll sign it.
Yeah. Okay. He has no idea what's coming in.
When you put it like that, let's go ahead.
The holding up moment, because I enjoy this. He does this for everything he signs. There it is. There it is. We're honoring the Corleone.
Yeah. So
The
that's
whole
what we're
conference
talking
is
about.
like that.
In this case, it's a class discipline. I don't know what that means. As someone with a kid in a classroom, I'm dubious as to what he just signed. But you're right. He does it with every single. There's a proclamation, as if there's an announcing of a king walking into a room. Do 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 do. Here's what you're signing, and here's why. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Look, I wish he were brilliant and evil.
Yeah.
I mean,
You do?
I would. Well, no, but you can tell what somebody's going to do. One of the reasons why a lot of allies, even foreign allies who are allies of Trump, are kind of scared of him, is that they don't know what he's going to do. The chaos isn't a strategy. The chaos comes from the fact that there is no plan here. Yeah. There's just reacting. Oh, we're doing these tariffs. oh, wait, a guy from Walmart, a guy from Target, and a guy from Home Depot walk in the
Right.
office and say, 40% of the stuff in our stores comes from China. What are you doing? Oh, okay, well, I'll peel them back. Yeah, oh, yeah, thank you. It's just moment to moment.
And that's what it took. It seems like for him to soften up on tariffs was a video yesterday from the so-called Big Three, the CEOs of
Yeah.
Target, of Walmart, and Home Depot come to the Oval Office and they say, listen, here's what your tariff policies will do. If you continue down this road, the store shelves are going to be empty. It's going to be really bad for business. And apparently, despite all of the top economists in the world telling Trump, this is bad. What you're doing for the economy is bad. It takes the CEOs of America's biggest businesses to come in and say, the store shelves are going to be empty. And as you talk about how he governs, he's very influenced by certain people. He
Mhm.
has this thing where, um, and you never know who is going to incite a reaction from him, who he's going to be influenced by. So it was fascinating that right after he meets with the big three, then he comes out and says, listen, we're negotiating with China. He backs off a little on this aggressive hardline policy that he's had. And it seemed to me like it happened right after that meeting.
It does. There are other factors that came in as well. So usually, stock market goes down as it did, and he was, at first, yeah, I'm not concerned with the stock market, and he probably did feel that because he probably felt, look, I've got all of this time before the next election, or even a year and a half before the midterms, and I've got time for my things to start to work that I believe will work, even though they wouldn't,
Mhm.
and everything will bounce back. I think what caught the attention of some of the people who also believe this, his Treasury Secretary, his Commerce Secretary, was usually when stocks go down, bonds go up in value because people, run to bonds ensure money.
Mhm.
And I think what kind of took them aback was the stock market went down and bond sales went down. People were not buying American government bonds because investors were going, "Well, I don't know what's going on with the United States." So both were going down, which would lead to stagflation. And I think that caught them by surprise. They still don't quite understand the world economy. They think, and by the way, this is not an attack just on Trump people, because there were a lot of liberal economists 10, 20 years ago who did not understand the effect of credit cards. They were like going back to the 50s and thinking that, oh, well, you know what? I mean, when interest rates go to a certain point, people just stop buying things because who's going to buy something and finance it at 19.8%? Nobody, except everybody on their Visa and MasterCards. So they didn't understand that. And there were a lot of bad predictions. And that came from the left. Also, a lot of people on the left, especially union economists, who did not understand world labor and how much things could be outsourced and how many things could be done in the internet, and thought, well, if you do these things and do tariffs and things, the jobs will come back, and went, oh, there's also this thing called automation and these other things. The jobs don't necessarily come back. So, his people are not alone in using 20, 30-year-old knowledge to completely misconstrue the economy. But you'd hope they'd be smarter.
Well, let's take a look at this video. This is actually a compilation that Mark Thompson sent us this morning about this roller coaster ride that we're going on when it comes to the markets. Let's take a look, Albert.
Break hour begins with the ongoing market volatility taking investors on yet another ride today.
It's been a really rough road. There's been so much volatility, Adam. And I think that investors are tired. Like Ryan says, they want clarity.
It doesn't get rid of the volatility. Some days up 1,000, some days down 1,000, depending on what's coming in the White House.
How are you feeling today?
I feel like I need a neck brace. The volatility has been insane.
Volatility, roller coaster ride. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that is bringing a reaction from Trump, or what finally was the moment that he realized that maybe he needs to make some changes on this policy.
Well, he had the he had a lot of billionaires talking to him about, we want this, that, and the other. And he was going, good, because I'm a billionaire too, so I want what you want. I think the first thing he started to hear in his own ear was Musk
Yeah.
going, look, my cars, Musk's first couple of cars were built mainly here.
Yeah.
But since then, like everybody else, he's outsourcing a lot of things because, there's not enough business for a company to survive and just, making things for America. That may sound ridiculous because of the huge economy we have, but for things like car parts, it's just true. It's true for a lot of things. And then Musk started freaking out about what was going on. Well, people aren't buying the cars, and now I've got Europe that's doesn't want anything to do with anything that I do.
Right.
And then his stockholders and his own board were yelling at him, "What the hell is going on here?" Because we're getting killed. And China is now making these battery advances, and not so much in the United States yet, anyway, but is building electric cars that are not only taking over the Chinese market, but they're taking over the European market. And Musk especially had hopes for the Chinese market. So first he gets Musk yelling at him. And then, as you said, you get the CEOs of major companies, like Home Depot, where I think 40% of everything they sell comes from China.
Wow.
And probably a lot of the rest has parts or chemicals or things like that from China. And Target, and they're in Walmart, and they're in there saying, you're killing your fellow billionaires. Now he's listening.
Now we got a problem. Once
Now
the
we got a
billionaires are affected, then everyone's in trouble.
Yeah.
You mentioned Elon Musk, and I hadn't planned to talk to you about it, but we saw yesterday Elon is saying it's time for him to step back. The earnings at Tesla for the first quarter of 2025 down 71%. And I think it's people voting with their wallet, looking at this guy who's become the face of the Trump administration almost, and taking on this bad guy role when it comes to making all these government cuts and axing services that people rely on. And his public image is now in the toilet, and his cars are tied to that public image. And so I don't know if, scaling back his presence in government is going to fix the fact that no one wants a Tesla right now, because you drive it down the road and people look at you like, oh, even though you may have bought your Tesla way before you knew what kind of a guy he was.
Yes, we've seen a lot of those bumper
Yeah.
stickers that say, I bought this
Right?
before Leon went crazy. Yeah.
So Tesla is now synonymous with bad guy.
There was always a weird duality there in that Musk was advertising Tesla from the very beginning as it's an electric car. You're not going to need that nasty fossil fuel anymore. And well-to-do people on the left were running to buy Teslas. And it's a great car, or at least the early ones were. Okay, the Cybertruck's a disaster, but in fact, I think it was Motor Trend that tested it when it first came out. And this is before Musk becomes this political pariah, and said, we tested the Cybertruck against a Subaru Outback, and this was their actual headline, and the Outback kicked its ass. So there were already some problems going on, because in terms of research and development for the cars, Tesla was now being outpaced by, Polestar and other brands. But there was always this duality that he was pitching the cars to left-wing environmentalists, and now he's pitched his politics to somebody who hates all of those people. So, it would be like the CEO of Kleenex becoming a big supporter of a president who says, wipe your nose on your sleeves, don't use tissues. At some point, you're going to have a problem with your branding.
And I don't think that the people that are hardcore MAGA are really interested in a car that plugs in.
No, for the most part, they're not. Also, when you get outside billionaires, there's this kind of economic gap in the Trump support. Despite the fact he's talking about, cutting Medicaid and all of these programs that help people who are down lower in the economic scale, that's still a huge part of his support. That's a huge part of his support are people who are angry, saying my life isn't as good as it should be, and I blame, in their case, the last 4 years, I blame Biden.
Yeah.
And so I'm voting to put Trump back in office. And they're just economically also not a Tesla crowd. You might get some billionaires running around buying them, but they also like Bentleys and cars that it has nothing to do with plugging it in. It's like I got a Maserati.
It's interesting because I drive kids around a lot,
Mhm.
and they have a very strong reaction to the Cybertruck. So if we're cruising around and a kid in the car sees a Cybertruck, they will point it out and yell, and there's a bunch of ews and boos in the car. I've never seen children have a bigger reaction to a vehicle on the road. Even kids are feeling the effect of his public image crisis. So I think it runs deep.
It does, and I haven't seen a reaction to a car's looks really
Yeah.
like this since this dates me, and I was a child. Let's be nice to me, but when the Etzel came out, and
Nobody liked
which
it?
was described as a car looked like it was choking on a peach pit,
Oh.
and the car would go by, and people would make kind of like fish faces to imitate the front of the Etzel going,
Uh-oh.
things like that. It wasn't calling out, making fun of them, yelling at them, and things like that. But yeah, I've never seen anything quite like this.
Well, apparently Musk is not the only billionaire who's upset at everything going on. And we know, as mentioned, that Trump seems to be listening to billionaires. So now we've got Richard Branson, who's the founder of Virgin Atlantic, who is also criticizing Trump's trade policies. He called them erratic, he called them unpredictable and harmful to people around the world. He is talking about the unpredictability being just awful for everyone. Erratic, unpredictable, very difficult for businesses to deal with. Branson said, an unsettled world is not good for anybody. People delay decisions on investment and spending. And he said, if Trump continues, he's in such danger of doing so much damage in the world. We'll see if Trump listens to Richard Branson, but another billionaire voice.
Yeah, he is, but he's a specific billionaire who makes his money from two things. First of all, from international travel, because he gave up Virgin Air, which was the domestic airline, and sold it to Alaska Airlines. So international travel, and right now, a lot of Europeans and others are canceling their travel plans in the United States.
Yeah.
They feel the United States is against them, and they want no part of the United States, and travel is down. If travel is down, Virgin Atlantic is in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how much Trump will listen to Branson on that. That's, kind of very specific. The other thing Branson, of course, is involved in is rocketry, although, way behind Musk and SpaceX,
Mm-hmm.
as is another billionaire who's a friend of Trump, Jeff Bezos,
With Blue Origin, yeah.
with Blue Origin, despite sending 7 people up in the air for 5 seconds and bringing them back down, including Katy Perry, who came down and kissed the ground, and she liked it. So Branson's probably also a little ticked off. I'm just saying, I'd like to say his motives are all, political, good-hearted, and they may be. I don't know him. But it's also Musk has a big in terms of SpaceX with supporting Trump. It's one of the reasons Bezos has moved in Trump's direction is to try and make sure Blue Origin isn't completely iced out by Musk and SpaceX. And Branson's kind of ticked off, well, the two of them are in there because they're in the United States, and look at me. So I don't think Trump's going to take Branson that seriously, frankly.
Well, it's okay for billionaires to speak out, Gil, but it's not okay for federal workers. Federal workers at the Labor Department got a message that any of them who speak with a journalist will face serious legal consequences.
Yes.
What? Is this America or not? A federal worker can't speak with a journalist?
It's
The
not, It's not the America we knew, Kim.
No, it isn't.
It
Let me
it just isn't. And there is, instead of believing, this has always been true of a lot of departments, of course, going down to local police
Sure.
and other local officers who believe, well, I'm working for the mayor or I'm in charge of this and the heck
Yeah.
with you, that we're taxpayers. We're paying these salaries, making a law saying that these taxpayer paid people are not allowed to talk to the taxpayers. It's not just undemocratic. It's just wrong on every possible level. But these people believe, who are running, the labor department, believe that no, everything is about fealty to the Secretary of Labor and the President of the United States and not to American citizens. It's kind of like, you lost the election, nya. And if we're doing something that is not in the best interests of American citizens, in the interest of just a few, you have no legal right to tell anybody. Now, look, can they get fired? I mean, some of them have, of course, civil service protections from government unions, and they should be protected to some degree. But to a certain extent, especially with the political people, yes, you can lose your job. If you're working for the Labor Department and you think, say, the Secretary of Labor is an idiot, you can expect to be fired. There are, by the way, Americans that don't understand this. I talk to Americans every day who go, well, Facebook brought down something. What happened to freedom of speech? Well, freedom of speech has nothing at all to do with Facebook or any private organization.
Freedom of speech, it does not mean freedom from consequences. But let me tell you this,
Yes.
Gil. This is this top official in the Labor Department who says that staff members could face criminal charges, not
Yes,
just
and that's
losing their jobs. Wait a minute. Now you're cooking with fire. There was a memo sent out by the Secretary of Labor, Lori Chavez de Remer's chief of staff. His name is Ji-Hoon Han, and ProPublica got its hands on this memo. And they say, this is what it says: individuals who disclose confidential information or engage in unauthorized communications with the media may face serious legal consequences, among them potential criminal penalties, depending on the nature of the information and the applicable laws, and of course, immediate disciplinary action up to and including termination.
Yeah. And in terms of criminal sanctions in the Labor Department, you have criminal sanctions for exposing classified information, which I don't believe the Labor Department has any. And Pete Hegseth certainly is not being prosecuted for exposing classified information, and the president himself for keeping it in his bathroom. But can you be fired? Yes. And, going back to the First Amendment means that you cannot be, and this is important, criminally prosecuted by the government for freedom of speech. It doesn't mean that if you're working at McDonald's and you grab the mic and go, hey, what are you doing here? The hamburgers at In-N-Out are better, that you can't be fired. Of course you could be fired. But criminal prosecution for truth telling is something that is undemocratic, probably illegal, although with this Supreme Court, who knows?
Well, we mentioned who Trump listens to, and one of the things I don't think that he pays attention to are his poll numbers. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's pollsters at the White House, and every time a poll comes out and his approval ratings go down, there's reaction and volatility in the White House about what are we going to do about this. But even on Fox News, they had to do a story about the latest poll numbers, and it shows this: that the latest poll numbers show that the approval rating of Trump is far behind every other recent president at this similar point in their presidency. His approval rating is 44% at almost 100 days in office. Joe Biden's at this time was 54%. It was 62% for Barack Obama, 63% for George W. Bush. He's even behind himself. Last time, at this point in his first term, 45% at the 100-day mark. Now we're at 44%. So it's pretty comparable. The thinking is that this is all driven by the economy, that right now, 38% of those asked approve of how he's handling the economy, 56% disapprove. So that's really low, the
Yeah,
economy approval numbers as well.
it is.
I don't know if he cares about the
No,
poll
he
numbers,
doesn't.
but you
And
know.
I'll tell you, as I see it says down there, Gilgro's journalist, I don't care either. These are snapshots in time.
Mhm.
As you get close to elections, they can mean something, not so much from the specific numbers, but by direction. So right now, those polls are going down, but those polls are from days ago when he was still pushing these very high tariffs. Now he's backed off. The market is rebounding. If you were to take that poll tomorrow, the numbers will probably be different. Also, we're a year and a half away from the midterms. And two things about that. One, we're a year and a half from his approval meaning anything as far as, anything practical is concerned. He's still going to be president. He's still going to be driving what he's driving. He's not going to become a liberal progressive tomorrow, be shaking hands with Bernie Sanders and talking, and singing Kumbaya, which is the cliche of what people sing. And none of that's going to happen. And even if you look at the midterms, you've got to look state by state, congressional district by congressional district. And in the end, only the polling there matters. And again, direction. In the last presidential campaign, we saw Harris, still with a slight lead in some polls, even in other polls. But we saw, especially in Pennsylvania, the direction was bad.
Mhm.
And that's what you look for. So right now he has a bad direction, but again, those polls are based on when the market was crumbling. Now the market's rebounding. I think those polls are already out of date.
Well, that doesn't matter to Trump because he's going to hold a 100-day celebration. We're going to Michigan and we're going to have a big
Yeah.
rally to celebrate the first 100 days in office. I don't remember another president that was into like going on the campaign trail and holding these big rallies and events while they're in office and dealing with the business of America. But he's going to Michigan next Tuesday. He's going to rally to celebrate the first 100 days in office, and apparently it's going to be a big to do.
Yeah, it's going to be a big
Yeah.
to do. And right, this early on, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No.
When you get close to an election, even though you're in office and dealing with things, you're going to be out and having big campaigns. So
Mhm.
I'll excuse him for that, although the timing this early in a term is weird.
Weird.
And the way these things are being planned, especially at a time when he's talking about, how frugal we have to be with spending on people, it's a little like, in Russia, again, where the economy is awful, even going back into the days of when communism was the official language of the Soviet Union then. And now Russia, where you have these, the May Day parades and here come the tanks and everything is celebration. Aren't we great? Yeah, you're starving and you're jobless and you have no food, and you're cold in your apartment. Your apartment's crappy, but look how great we are. And that's a bit how this comes off. But he's very self-aggrandizing and always has been. When he did what was basically a good deed, one of the few he's ever done, when he was in New York City, and the Woolman skating rink was basically, the Parks Department was running out of money to keep the skating rink in Central Park alive. He gave money to keep the skating rink alive, for which people loved him. But he insisted it be named after him.
Oh,
That's just always been Donald.
this is just the way it goes.
All his buildings are named after him. It's just his hotels are all. He's very good at branding.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. I mean, he's been bad in a lot of business senses. He's lost a lot of money. He's gone bankrupt in businesses, I think 7 times. But he's very good at branding. And branding, self-aggrandizing, in his case, they kind of go together.
I'm reminded of the birthday parade that's apparently coming in June, the military parade from the
That's
Pentagon
the
to the White
thing
House.
that really caught my attention more than Michigan, because
Mhm.
that is the most like one of those old Soviet parades
Yep.
where Stalin would stand there, or Khrushchev, and, watching the tanks and everything go by
Mhm.
and look how powerful I am. It's
Yeah.
it's sad. It's really sad.
My time with you is coming to a close, but I wanted to bring up this story because I'm fascinated to see what you think.
Yeah.
And I have some video. There's a young man who is a victim of a school shooting, and he's now ranks pretty high in the Democratic National Committee. And he's got
Hog.
some new ideas, David Hogg, about how we should fix the Democratic Party. That you've got to look at it as what happened in the election and what went wrong and how to revamp the Democratic Party. And part of doing that, that he says, is that we should look at Democrats, even the ones who won and safe districts, but maybe they're languishing there. Maybe they're not speaking up with strong voices. Maybe he feels that they could be dragging the party down instead of being primaried by young, upcoming Democrats with new, fresh ideas who will make the party stronger and move it into this, next election. And so he's thinking it's a good idea to spend money to primary some of these Democrats that are in safe districts instead of taking the money and then focusing it on the races against Republican challengers or Republican other candidates.
Yeah.
He was on a podcast, Brian Tyler Cohen's podcast yesterday, and here's what he had to say.
Like, I think it is possible for us to walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. Leaders We Deserve is also focused on supporting candidates that are critical to gaining majorities for Democrats, both in the House and in state legislatures, where we did a lot of work last election cycle. So I would say to that comment, right now, we're going to have to spend several $100 million no matter what supporting, and by we, I mean the party in general, is going to have to spend several $100 million supporting frontline candidates that are critical to winning back the majority. If there are young people that are running there that are aligned with our values of Leaders We Deserve, we plan on supporting them so that we can win back the majority. We also need to realize, though, part of the reason we need to spend that much is because our approval rating is awful. And that goes beyond just what our candidate.
Thank you very much, Albert. I appreciate it. We got to hear some of that. But what the DNC chair is saying is that he wants a proposal to require DNC officers to stay neutral in all Democratic primaries now. And he may force David Hogg to decide either get out of the primary game or lose your post at the DNC.
I have very mixed feelings about what Hogg is saying. And when he talks about, trying to get better candidates, yes, the Democratic Party has been very bad about that. Several years ago, there was a war veteran, I think from the Iraq War, highly decorated, who was running for the Democratic primary and Senate primary in Ohio. And Chuck Schumer, stupidly, said, no, we're not supporting you. It's not your time. So-and-so has been, waiting in the wings all of these years for the race. And the polls showed that this guy, this veteran who was, liberal in his philosophy and everything, was almost a shoo-in to win in increasingly red Ohio. And Schumer shot him down and made sure that no money would go to his campaign from the DNC. And they nominated the guy Schumer wanted, and that guy got killed, got totally murdered. So the Democrats have been very bad about picking candidates who people like, and they've been very establishment. That's all true.
Yeah.
On picking people to challenge Democrats in safe Democratic areas, that's probably not a great idea in terms of getting the vote. If you've got safe votes, look, we're coming up 2026. You're going to have in the Senate, the toss-up races are both Democratic races, are both races where Democrats are in office now. You've got Ossoff in Georgia, and then you've got an open seat in Michigan. There aren't really any Republicans that are in deep trouble for 2026 in the Senate. So if you're going to then undercut with primary battles, Democrats around the country who are in safe seats, you might pick one or two new leaders, but you also might lose some seats that were safe. So in putting a lot of money in those areas where you need, to make sure you win, or you've got a real chance of grabbing a seat. That's true in some House seats. I'm with him. But just getting rid of people who are voting Democratic, who are in safe Democratic seats, is probably a waste of money, and worse, probably a chance for two Democrats in the primary to go at one another, creating fodder for Republican commercials in the main election.
It's definitely not the way things have been done. It's not the way the Democratic National Committee operates. But if something dramatic like this isn't done, then how do you remake the Democratic Party? How do you shake things up so that in the next election you're fresh and you're new and you're ready for the challenges ahead? If you don't take a look at yourself and make these hard choices, I'm not saying it's right. I am saying that I understand the concept of trying to make change.
I do. But you've got to look at what changed. What Carville kept saying to Bill Clinton over and over again, it's the economy, stupid, was the rule. And I saw Democrats on, YouTube and Instagram and all of these things making fun of people who are complaining about the price of eggs, not realizing that a lot of that swing vote, people who weren't doing well, being able to put breakfast on the table was an issue.
Right.
And some of the other progressive issues that they were talking about that still are taking up a lot of time talking about were not big issues for them. The economy was. They wanted to hear about jobs. They wanted to hear about inflation. The Democrats needed to get out in front of that, and they were getting out in front of issues that either affected very few people and now this would start a whole thing, and I know you're out of time, but the issue, for instance, of whether trans girls could compete in high school and college sports.
Sure.
76% of Democrats were against that.
Mm.
Now, you can say, look, we'll get into office and we're going to give a very sympathetic ear to that. And what's a very complicated issue, like the Middle East, and so many issues where Americans read one paragraph of a story and then make up their minds and yell at each other. But there was a thing where a lot of Democrats, 3/4 of Democrats, were going, I don't think so. And that got talked about more by some, not all, but by some politicians than food prices.
Yeah.
And if the party wants to get elected and then do good things for other people by getting into office, they have to concentrate on what people, basically the voters, want to hear and what's affecting most of their lives. And Democratic Party has done a bad job of that recently. And that's where it needs to work harder.
On the way out, I'll ask you this about the White House press corps, which is now filled with right-wing media people who I don't want to put the word journalist after their name, but apparently CNN asked, "Do you consider yourself journalists?" They're asking this to the so-called new media people that are rolling around the White House trying to report on stories, but really only reporting what Trump wants to hear, right? And asking the questions that Trump responds to most favorably. They say, we're all biased. We just wear our bias, which I think is a pejorative term to begin with, on our sleeves. So they admit their bias. Can we let me roll back. I can't even, because it's so outrageous and so against what we stand for. We can't have democracy without the truth telling in the media. And when you have what now looks like a state media forming, a coalition of people who only want to report what the president's message is and nothing else, and not the truth, I think this is part of us being in real trouble.
One of the sad days of every reporter's gone through it, not even necessarily a political story, is when someone that in your heart you wanted to do well or you supported, privately, does something, you're going to have to report on what a jerk they are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happened to All of us.
All
I
of us.
remember when the head of Odyssey House, who I knew very well and worked very hard for children and getting kids off the street and all of that, when it came out that he was having sex with some of the older kids.
Oh God.
And I know. And I couldn't believe it at first. I went, Bruce? No, 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 no way. I know him. And I was in New York at the time, and the New York Post broke the story. And Jerry Nachman, who was the publisher of the Post in those days, heard that I didn't believe the story, and he called me. He was yelling at me. Jerry was my friend.
Yeah.
But Jerry then did have Charlie Sennett, who's the reporter on the story, call me and say, yeah, Gil, I didn't want it to be true either, but it's true. And, we all have those days. And that's what being a reporter and a journalist is. It's like whatever your personal, bias or heart or anything is, you report what's there.
Yep.
Because that's the job. I think there's a lot of people who don't like that. And I think there's also the problem that we've gotten very loose with the term journalist. I can now just give my opinions and stuff because I'm out of day to day. I still do specials for CBS, but I no longer cover politics. I do them. I'm working on one. Please listen to it across the country.
What are you working on, by the way?
For Memorial Day, and
Okay.
there's no politics in it. It's about the lives of our fighting men and women and what's happening to with PTSD treatments and all of that. So I can now mouth off when I never would have when I was acting, doing the hourly newscasts and all of that.
As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even register as a party to vote. I always registered as declined to state because I felt like I wanted to maintain that, barrier of I don't want anyone to know what I think about anything. Again, that's changed. I'm no longer only, someone who goes out and reports on stories anymore. So that's the
Here's
way
where
to go.
this gets messy. I never would have done the Mark Thompson show.
Right.
I never would have talked to you when I was a working day-to-day journalist reporting on people.
Absolutely.
But then we started doing these round tables
Mm-hmm.
on Meet the Press and all of these Sunday shows, Face the Nation, and reporters who were reporting the news the rest of the week were giving their opinions. And then we started with Fox News and MSNBC, and then we started calling columnists journalists.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, a columnist wasn't a journalist unless they were a columnist who actually did reporting, of whom there used to be some. Mike Royko in Chicago, Jimmy Breslin in New York. You had some of them, but they were always in the minority. Mostly they were just people spewing opinions. Now everybody's a freaking journalist.
Yeah.
Everybody's a reporter. People go on cable television and go on radio and podcasts and spewing opinions, but still calling themselves journalists and reporters when they're just people with opinions, maybe informed, maybe not. But I think we've dumbed down the word.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's made this kind of thing, well, yeah, I'm biased, who cares, acceptable in a world where it never used to be. That was always a no-no. If I had gone on a show like this and said all these things when I was a working day-to-day reporter, they would have handed me my papers the next day.
Wouldn't have done it. You had to make a choice when you became a talk show host that, you were no longer a working person telling the stories of the day in the way a journalist would. I remember the day at KGO where they told me, okay, so we need you along with your anchoring duties. We need you to sit along the talk show host and offer opinion. And I had to think about it. That's what they were looking for. So I had to revamp and change. But it was uncomfortable because it goes against the ethics that we're all taught.
Yeah.
Keep your opinions out of it.
No, and I knew when I took the job at KGO, when I was offered the job at KGO and taking it, that I was leaving my reporter life behind.
Right.
I might still do reporting, but using my skills to ferret out facts. But once I became a talk show host, I knew that was now back here somewhere. I did it for various reasons, one of which KGO is like the greatest radio station that ever existed. The other thing, it was able to actually do things about social issues that I could otherwise just report on. We could do something about homelessness, when we did the Thanksgiving Day shows raising
Sure.
money for St. Anthony's and the other charities that were feeding people. And, I kind of felt that instead of being an observer, I could actually do things that could help. But that's a choice you make. And the day you make that choice, you leave that mantle journalist reporter back here somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it seems that we understand that, but the folks covering the White House don't understand they're not journalists. Many
No.
of them, not all of them, but the ones that are, from the right-wing media, they're not journalists. They're just mouthpieces. They're just
Yes,
echoing a press
and
release.
there are
That's it.
people who, on the
Yeah.
left wing like that too,
Yeah.
who say, I'm a journalist, but they don't do any actual reporting. They don't pick up the phone. They just, write things based on what they read actual reporters reporting. And yeah, there used to be that line there, and it's gone. And it's sad because it gives people a credibility they don't deserve.
Absolutely. Gil Gross, how awesome that you stopped by the show. I have to tell you that every time Mark Thompson is gone, I'll put in a call to you and say, let's have Gil Gross on the show, get him in there, talk politics. And then I always get a call from Mark Thompson later. Why do you always have him on when I'm not on? I want to talk to Gil Gross too. So I have to book you for one time when Mark is actually in so that you guys can have a great
Oh,
conversation.
you
too.
do the booking.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You're the one.
Yeah.
I love it.
Busted. Yeah. So I
Well,
always
Mark,
save you
I'll
for
never
myself.
see you.
Yeah, exactly. Gil Gross, thank you so much for stopping by the show. It's always
Thank you,
a
Kim.
pleasure. Thank
Thank
you
you,
for coming
Santa
in.
Claus.
Bye. Bye. Yeah, Kate.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.